Good evening, everybody. We're going to get started in just a minute. Okay, I have 6 o'clock. So, Richie, do you want to?
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our third community meeting regarding the new Revere High School building project. I am going to let everyone know that translation is available. In just a few moments, there'll be a globe on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Simply click on the globe and click on your preferred language. And at this time, I'm going to pause and welcome Juan to give those instructions in Spanish.
Buenas tardes todo el mundo, bienvenidos a la reunión del Colegio Revere. A continuación van a ver un globo en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla donde van a poder seleccionar el idioma que prefieran para escuchar la presentación. Escojan español si quieren escuchar la presentación en el idioma español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Juan. And now at this time, I'm going to ask Danya to give those instructions in Arabic. And if you are selecting Arabic, to select the language of French, as unfortunately Arabic is not an option.
مساء الخير جميعا. تتوفر الترجمة الفورية للغة العربية لهذا الاجتماع. إن أردتم الاستماع لهذا الاجتماع باللغة العربية أرجو الضغط على الكرة الأرضية، أيقونة الكرة الأرضية التي ستظهر بعد قليل في أسفل الشاشة، واختيار اللغة الفرنسية وليس العربية، لأن زوم للأسف لا يوفر حاليا اللغة العربية، فرجاء اختيار اللغة الفرنسية. شكرا.
Thank you, Danya. And finally, I would ask Ariana to give those instructions in Portuguese, please.
Olá, boa tarde a todos, bem-vindo a mais uma apresentação do projeto da Escola de Ensino Médio da cidade de Revere. Vai ter um globo na parte direita embaixo da tela. Se você gostaria de escutar a tradução em português, por favor, clique no globo e escolha a tradução para português. Obrigada.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ariana. All right, at this time, we're going to enable the interpretation. Interpretation is now available, so please click your language of choice, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Dr. Gallucci. So I just briefly want to thank everybody who's here tonight for giving their time and joining us. The input from parents and students and the community is critically important to this project. And we're thrilled to be here with our partners from Perkins Eastman and from Left Field, who are going to give us a little bit of a review of where we've come from in the process, and then also give us a little bit of information about where we're going. And as we go through the process, there will be information, and there'll be some polls that we're going to ask the folks attending to participate in, so that we can take your feedback and use that to drive this project. So with that, I will pass it over to the team from Perkins Eastman.
Thank you, Diane, Dr. Kelly. I'm going to share my screen and give a brief introduction. For those of you that have not attended the community meetings prior, you'll recognize that we will be talking with pauses. And this is so that we can have the interpreters keep pace with us. So please bear with us. We'll also have team members introduce themselves as they present. My name is Robert Bell. I am the educational planner and programmer from Perkins Eastman. And I'm going to kick us off. The first 20 to 30 minutes is a review of where we've been. And then we're going to have a little bit of time for question and answer. But we'll proceed to a second part, which is going to be talking about sustainability, health, and wellness, and goals for the school. So if I just start with the basically the overview of team, schedule, and the vision for the school. The city is partnering with the MSBA, that's the Mass School Building Authority. And they help with the funding for school projects across the Commonwealth. They also established the process that we're following. They established the guidelines, the enrollment, and they're really there to see that this process is open and fair and results in a goals-driven school for Revere. Part of their process is to have the Revere City form a school building committee. And I think there are upward of about 18 members. It also includes the hiring of an owner's project manager, and that is left field, and there are representatives here tonight. And of course, also the architect. And I would say that the architectural team is really very large. It's got close to 28 different specialists and consultants that participate in the project. The overall process for a school of this magnitude is somewhere in the range of 5 to 8 years. And the difference between 5 and 8 is really whether it's new construction or whether it's renovation, which often takes longer. The colored rectangles that you see to the far left represent the 3 years that we design and document the school project. Right in the middle is a critical point where we have completed enough of the design so that we can put a cost to it and take it for votes and approvals. That's about 1.5 years from now, or actually 1.5 years from when we started. If I zoom in to that first 1.5 years, you can see what 3 phases or 3 submissions that the state requires. We're about 1/3 of the way through the second phase. So what we've completed is what's called the preliminary design program. And that means that we've taken a look at the existing school and site. We've helped develop in collaboration with the school and community an educational vision that turns into an educational program, which tells us what we need to do for the design. We've also developed what are the space needs for the school, all the rooms that are required. That also led to development of planning options. So you'll see, we'll share with you where we've been and where we are. And costs are also developed at this time, and they're very rough. They're not the actual, but they're for comparative purposes. All the way through this process, we're reaching out and trying to connect to the community and the faculty and get as much input on this as possible, because this, in the end, is a building that will serve the community for many, many generations. I want to stress the importance of where we are right now. We've got about 2 months left in this preferred schematic report, that the phase that we're in. And what's critical is right now we're looking at a handful, I think it's about 11 options. And when we get to the end of this process in really middle October, and then it's submitted in late October, we need one solution. So the school building committee will be helping make this decision with input from the community and the educators. But we really want to take the options from 11 down to that one preferred solution. And the last phase is schematic design, where we take that one solution and we develop it in much more detail so that we can put a real cost to it, a real budget, and seek approvals. So I mentioned that it's a goals-driven process. And so I want to share, for those that haven't been part of the earlier community meetings, what the goals for this school are. The pertinent design priorities that we have are to first create a heart of the school. This is important because we want to create a community and a culture, and we want a space where everything comes together and the community has access to the rich programs and spaces. So that leads right into extended use for the school and for the community, making this a building for all. We also seek within the academic classroom wings to create clusters and neighborhoods. This is important so that we can break down the scale of the building and create collaborative centers for education. We also have a variety of specialty labs and spaces to create rich programs, again, for both students and community. We seek to achieve flexible and agile rooms, classrooms, and labs so that they can adapt over time. We're charged to think of this as a full campus concept. Building that's connected indoors and out, uses the landscape, uses the building as a teaching tool, and those indoor-out connections are really important to connect to learning, science, and just quality health and wellness of the spaces. What I'm showing you now is a design concept. It's what we call a bubble diagram. And this takes all of those features we just talked about and puts them into a organizational idea. You can see right in the center, there's the CAF Commons, classroom neighborhoods that are blue wings off to the left, Health and Wellness Center, the rich robotics and culinary and maker type spaces, all accessible. And then connections to outdoors, including an auditorium that could open to the outdoor spaces. This is an example of what a heart of a school could look like. If it's multi-story, we want to make sure that it's connecting all those stories. It becomes the epicenter, the life center, the enrichment area for the school. You can see daylight and flexible use of spaces all around. These are some built examples. The diagram in the middle shows similar connections on multi-floors. And you can see to the left, the grand open spaces with a lot of activity. In many cases, including in Revere in the bottom left, we imagine the commons being cafeteria space, so it's multi-purpose. And also connecting all the programs and bringing in wonderful natural light. This next slide shows example of neighborhood classrooms. And some of these are diagrams that really just show a handful of classrooms, science labs organized around a corridor space, which is really an extension of learning inside the classroom. You can see at every grade level, these corridor spaces become informal learning or collaborative centers. We see this in a lot of schools at every age group, making use of really every bit of the school, not just thinking of a corridor as the way you get from point A to B, but making it educational. This next slide is an example of indoor-out connections. You can see on the upper right, outdoor learning in gardens. To the bottom left, you can see an auditorium that also connects outdoor to the landscape. Some of these concepts we hope to employ here at the Revere High School project. This is another example, a rendering that shows those types of concepts, a classroom wing to the left and to the right with the auditorium in the center. Enrichment and wellness spaces to the left, a pathway that connects the campus, and gardens, raised bed gardens to the right. So this too can also be a real community asset. And last, I wanted to show some other examples of outdoor learning, outdoor amphitheater, dining space that extends outside, the fitness pathways that can connect the campus. All of these are working to create and connect the school to the landscape and to the Revere context. Oops. So quickly, we'll also go over where we've been for planning options. Before I do that and I hand it over to Dawn, I'm going to describe this concept plan, which is very much like the bubble diagram, except that in this case, it includes all the exact spaces that are needed. And it organizes those spaces adjacent to each other to really give us a roadmap for the size and scale and pieces and parts of the building. This concept plan really doesn't exist on a site. It just helps us organize and begin the design process. So I'm going to have Dawn take us through the various options on each site.
Thank you, Bob. My name is Dawn Guariello, and I'm a designer with Perkins Eastman, working alongside Bob. As Bob said, we're going to give you high-level overview of some of the options. Those of you that joined us in previous meetings may remember there were 6 sites that were under consideration in the the preliminary design program piece of the project. At the end of that, 3 sites moved forward into the preferred schematic design, and those are the existing high school site, Wonderland site, and the Revere Housing Authority site. So those have made their way into the preferred schematic design, and I will walk you through multiple options on each of those sites. We'll begin with the existing high school site. All of these options, I just want to preface and say that almost all of them aim to achieve the visioning aspects that Bob described. And those include a heart of the school, that very vibrant space through the middle with all the connections to program and community spaces, classroom, neighborhoods, as well as connections to landscape. The one exception might be this particular plan. This is option 1A. It's a addition renovation option on the existing high school site. It renovates the large field house. Thank you, Bob, in the middle of the screen, which is otherwise larger than the MSBA might allow. So to renovate it retains the value of the size of that space. It builds 2 new 3-story classroom wings over some of the existing parking. And what that does is allows us to then take down, once that's complete, the balance of the existing building to the west of the field house and build new auditorium, admin, and freshman academy above the admin along School Street. This would potentially have a longer construction duration and obviously is a very tight site. Next, Bob. Oh, one thing, I'm sorry, on that previous option, it does not interrupt the Aracola fields to the east. So those fields would remain in their current location. The next option, 1A point A, actually builds the 2 new 4-story classroom buildings over the existing baseball field that is Aracola, part of Aracola Park. And what that would then do, similar to the last option, allows us to then take down the west side of the building. We would still renovate the field house through the middle. And so we basically have all new construction north and east of the field house. And then once the existing building that is demolished is taken down, we would replicate the Aracola baseball field. The multi-purpose field would remain along Route 60 and with some added tennis courts on campus. Option 1C builds all new, no addition renovation, all new on the existing Aracola fields, both baseball and multi-purpose. So those would be out of order until the duration of the project is complete. But what that does is allows the existing building to function on site during the duration of the construction. And we build all new take down the existing and then replicate the Aracola fields. You might recognize the footprint. It's quite similar to what Bob described, but obviously fit to this particular site with its constraints. The next option goes from a 3-story version of all new on the Aracola Park to a 4-story classroom building version. What that does is reduces the footprint of the building on site and allows for a little bit of breathing room and increased site amenities around the new building. This is obviously a tight site and lots of constraints, so the reduction of footprint is quite helpful. And it's worth pointing out the main entry here is sort of in the middle of the site. Thank you, Bob. With access off of School Street still, as well as a little bit of access off of Route 60. We were asked to consider what it might look like to flip that and have the main entry off of the Route 60 side. So you see the front of the school from Route 60. And that's what this option 1C point B shows here. Obviously, the parking is still in its current location, so there would be a secondary entry for those who park on site. Thank you, Bob. But it has all the same attributes of the 4-story, as well as replicating the fields. Okay, now we'll move to the Wonderland site. There are a couple options here. This is a new 3-story option. All of the building options on Wonderland build sort of to the south of the site, which is high ground. As you know, this is an open, undeveloped field currently, and this is also in a floodplain. So this is the highest elevation of land on this particular site, hence the building location being placed here. So this is all new. This allows the existing high school to remain functioning during the duration of the project. A downside to this site is that it is not currently owned by the city of Revere. So there would be a cost to purchase this site. But what it does allow is that campus feel that Bob mentioned, which would be all inclusive on site, recognizing that there are constraints with major roadways as well as train tracks to the northwest. This is not as easily accessible as the existing high school site from the center of the city. So this is the 3-story option 2A point A, which flips the building and shows the main entry not on campus, but outward facing toward the BFW Parkway. So identical floor plan to option 2A, only flipped to show the front entry along BFW. And then lastly, we looked at a 4-story footprint, again, reducing the amount of building footprint on the site, which would allow for additional breathing room, connection to outdoors, as well as site amenities. And that's what you're looking at here in option 2A point B. Lastly, we will walk through the Revere Housing Authority site options. We'll start with 3B, which is a medium version of the new construction. It affects the smallest amount of units, approximately 150-ish units, give or take. And what that allows us to do is build an all-new building connecting between Cushman Ave and Constitution Ave, with that heart of the school connection being at both levels, recognizing Cushman Ave is at a higher ground. The front entry would be along Constitution Avenue with parking to the east, and it would, the balance of the building, it would stop along Adams Street, which is a current through street to the west. This allows lots of outdoor connections, obviously the pure classroom neighborhoods that are shown, as well as the heart of the school, which I already mentioned. The next option looks at a 4-story version, which again just shows a tighter footprint, recognizing that land in Revere is precious. And if we can reduce the footprint, that obviously allows us to do more at grade. And that's what you're looking at here in option 3B.A. Lastly, we were asked to look at an enlarged version from 3B that might take more of the housing authority units, but replicate them on site, which is the long linear, thank you, Bob, white boxes that you see in the version of new townhouses potentially, or replicated housing to keep some of those unit occupants on site and be able to use the amenities of the new high school. And this also has increased fields as well as tennis courts, walking paths, so additional site amenities. And this would be a phase 2. So what we would consider is 3B or 3B.A, and then look at a phase 2, which once the building is built, the areas identified in orange would be phase 2 that would happen after the building is complete. So I think that's all of the options. We have summary slides if that's helpful. Thank you, Bob. These are the new, these are the existing high school sites, existing high school site options that I walked you through. And then we have the Wonderland site options, the 3 up top, and the 3 on the bottom are the housing authority site options.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thanks. I think we were going to pause and ask if there were any questions from the audience before we move on to our next topic, if that's correct, Bob.
Yes, I think we'll take about 10 minutes worth of questions. If there aren't any questions, we can move along. So I'll give a moment to see if we've got any in the chat or through YouTube.
We did have one in the YouTube chat. It just asked about getting copies of these plans or if these visuals are available.
Great. I think the question may already have been interpreted by our interpreters, but question is, are the plans available? And we definitely, if anybody visits the website or goes through the Revere Public Schools site to connect to this project, we are putting together all the presentations. They should be available shortly after every meeting, sometimes as the meeting begins. And so that should be widely available, accessible. Any other questions on the plans?
None right now on the Zoom. I should tell people on the Zoom they can put their questions in the Q&A or in the chat if they have any.
And while we wait or before we move on, I'll just say that the school building committee meetings are also posted and they are open to the public. Through the course of those meetings, there's detailed discussion about each one of these, including the pros and the cons and other considerations. And so through the course of the next several meetings, which will occur in September and into October, we'll probably hear that some of these are proving not very viable. Others will remain, and ultimately an assessment will be made to choose the preferred option. So if people don't have questions now, certainly feel free to reach out or participate in those meetings.
So one question posed on YouTube. First, they complimented and said there are a lot of open spaces and it looks beautiful. And then they asked what spaces are available for children who need quiet and calm space.
That's a great question. So one of the things that's very important in a modern school is to provide space for everybody. And that needs to occur throughout. So in clusters of classrooms, there needs to be nearby small group or meeting space. And that's some of what we're building into the school. Also, in the major spaces, like even entering the main lobby, we're looking to create parent and community space and access to small group or meeting space. Within the classrooms themselves, we try to make sure that the furniture can be set up so that we can create smaller, quieter, or spaces that are more distraction free. So it's very much a part of what we think about. We think about it in the landscape as well. Quiet, reflective spaces, as well as active spaces.
And then one thing I'll add to that, Bob, is we've talked about having differentiated cafeteria spaces. So there's not one giant, loud, cacophonous place for kids to eat their lunch, but rather several smaller. There'll still be one large space, but there'll also be other smaller eating spaces for kids who need some quiet time during the day.
That's right.
There is a question in the Zoom. It says, can you let us know how many people could or would be displaced for all of the housing authority choices? Also, is there a number of how many of these residents are disabled? And I can probably answer that one. We met with the Revere Housing Authority Board yesterday, and we're talking to them about what's viable and allowable, and trying to determine if the housing authority is an actual option for the new high school. When we met with them and discussed, and I don't know if Bob, you can go back to the 3A model, the larger site there. So when you look at the section where the main building is that Dawn had described as the phase 1, we know there would be about 150 units there. And the idea would be to, if this even becomes viable, and none of these options have been selected at this point, so I want to just make sure that's clear to everybody. We're at the point where we're talking about what are the different ideas. Nothing has been selected. But there are about 150 units there that would need to be rebuilt somewhere else in order for us, and those folks would need to be moved into their new homes before we could start construction on the new high school building. And then after that was done, there are about, I think it was 130 up in that upper region where Bob is highlighting now. And the idea would be that we would rebuild those units on site, kind of overlapping with the building of the high school. It would be an entirely separate project. The city would have to fund it differently from this project. It would have nothing to do with the MSBA, but it would be to rebuild those housing units. And then once those housing units are finished, those folks would stay on site, and then the fields would be built there. So it's almost really like a 3-phase project if we were to go with this option. And the existing housing units that are down at the far end near Broadway, down in the lower right-hand corner there, they would stay as they are. And also the units that are way up the top, which are really the veterans housing, they would stay as well. And so this is one of the ideas that we're talking about. And the thing that makes this an attractive idea is that it is in the middle of the city. So it's largely accessible by most of Revere's residents. It would enable a lot of kids to walk to school. The issue with the Wonderland site is that it's locked by the commuter rail and by highways. So when we think about kids walking to school, that becomes a worry. And we certainly, if we do go with the Wonderland site, would have to think about overpasses and things that would allow the kids to access the site on foot when that is all in place, then this becomes a more attractive site. That involves working with the state, because these are state roadways, and working with them to build access points for pedestrians would be part of the work. And if we go with the Wonderland site, we will do that work and make sure that we have that so that kids can safely get to school. And I should, since I've given those two summaries, I should just say that our hope to build offsite is so that we can rehab the existing high school building into a central middle school, which would allow us to convert at least some of the middle schools into elementary schools. And that would alleviate the overcrowding that we currently have across the district. The other piece about building on the existing site is worry about traffic patterns with the new high school and the Rumney Marsh being side by side right off of American Legion Highway. But all of these, I think, as the designers have worked with us and as the school building committee has gone through the different options, I think all three of these are viable, and whichever one is ultimately selected will make work and will be great for the kids and great for the community.
And Dr. Kelly, I think you answered the next question that was on YouTube, asking why Wonderland would be deemed less accessible, given that it's surrounded by the highways. Yeah,
the highways are the concern, and even just knowing teenagers, anybody who has one or knows one, realizes that even when we have crosswalks that bridge the highways, some kids will choose not to use them. And so it's just that piece of a safety concern for the safe arrival of students at school every day. And then also, of course, the traffic.
I think there may be more questions that come in, but we'd like to move on to the second half, and hopefully we'll reserve time at the end to circle back. So I'll stop sharing and I'll turn this over to our Health and Wellness Sustainable Design team, led by Heather Hardway.
Thank you. Can everyone see my screen? Great. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Heather Howergy. I'm the Director of Sustainability for Perkins Eastman. And now we're gonna switch gears a little bit, and we'd actually like to hear from you a little bit about your priorities as they relate to sustainability at Revere. So before we get into that, I just like to set the stage of what we mean by sustainability. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So for us, when we're talking about it today, it's more than just tree hugging or solar panels on a roof, or even completing a LEED checklist if you're familiar with that rating system. While third-party certifications such as LEED are valuable, and Revere will be going for LEED certification, they're not the end-all be-all of sustainability. And we actually like and prefer to set our sustainability goals and targets for a project outside of any particular rating system as opposed to the other way around. So when we talk about sustainability, we approach it more holistically. Certainly, there's an environmental component to sustainability, looking at how we reduce the amount of resources that we're utilizing on a project, how we reduce our impact on climate and habitat. But there's also a strong social component to sustainability. So how does the buildings and the environments that we're creating support health and well-being of the building occupants? How can it support the local community? And how can it address equity holistically as well? Finally, if we address environmental value and social value, but we don't look at the economic value, then ultimately we don't consider that sustainable either. So making sure that we're balancing all these choices against first costs, operating costs, and market value decisions allows us to kind of make sure that we're delivering a project that is holistically sustainable in all of these categories. When you look at sustainability that way, it really is everything. So if sustainability is everything, how do we measure and track it? The last time we met together, we introduced what's called the AIA Framework for Design Excellence, which, as you'll see here, holds up 10 different measures that make a successful project. As you look at each of these, they start to fall into those same 3 buckets that I showed on the earlier slide. And they're actually a great way to guide the sustainability conversation on a project. So as I showed last time, this is a workshop summary from one of the past school building committee meetings where we actually went through each of these 10 measures and discussed top priorities for the Revere High School project in particular. Although we'll definitely be addressing all 10 of them in the design of this project, we highlighted 5 that really rose to the top as key priorities. And of those 5, as you see on the right, today I'd like for us to zoom into 3 categories in particular and get a little bit of feedback and direction from you. So today we'll be looking at well-being, energy, and change. Jumping into well-being. To set the stage for this conversation, I'd just like to highlight why it's important for us to discuss well-being at this stage in design. So research shows that our individual health is heavily affected by the physical environments that we're a part of, the rooms and the spaces that we're in right now. Actually, that has a bigger impact on our health than our genetics, our medical care, and our lifestyle and health behaviors combined. So design and the environments that we're in really matters. In particular, here are some strategies that we'd like to discuss today. First and foremost, the quality of the indoor environment. When we talk about the quality of the indoor environment, we're talking about access to daylight, whether you're thermally comfortable in that space, acoustics, and air quality. And as a subcomponent of air quality, we'll also spend a little time today talking about materials and how they can impact air quality. Finally, the last category that we'll talk about is connection to the outdoors. Bob already mentioned this earlier as a priority that's been brought to the top, and in particular, how we can foster the connection to impact health and wellness. So I'm going to take a few minutes to go through each of these in more detail to give you a sense of what we might be prioritizing in the design. Access to daylight, I'll start with when we're looking at indoor environmental quality, has been shown to have a direct impact on student test scores. Even our ability to sleep at night is impacted by our exposure to daylight. But too much daylight or glare can cause issues with visual discomfort, and it can create distracting conditions in learning environments. So paying attention to daylight distribution throughout the space and glare reduction is important to health and wellness. From a thermal comfort perspective, there's a lot of variables that determine whether or not you're comfortable, including the amount of clothing that you're wearing, whether or not you just went for a run. But in general, we can create environments that fall within a standard comfort zone. And they don't create, these kind of environments don't create uneven or drafty conditions within the learning environment that do impact your ability to focus on particular tasks at hand and also impact our health. From an acoustic side of things, high levels of background noise. When I say background noise, usually that's noise coming from mechanical equipment that's in the room, or maybe a nearby busy street, like some of the options that we were showing, or maybe an airplane going overhead. All of these background noise factors have been shown to influence test scores within students. But more importantly, background noise has been shown to be particularly detrimental to non-native language learners. and can therefore exacerbate the issue of inequity within a learning environment. So this is certainly something that we want to prioritize and consider for Revere. Finally, air quality. This topic has obviously been a priority conversation in the last year and a half or so, but in general, the indoor environment can have about 2 to 5 times the number of pollutants than the outdoor environment air does. So in addition to causing issues with health concerns like asthma or illness spread or other respiratory concerns, indoor air quality has also been shown to impact our cognitive function and our ability to think within certain environments. So as a subset to the air quality conversation, there's a lot that goes into that, whether it's ventilation or filtration, but it's also heavily affected by the physical materials that we bring into the indoor environment. Unfortunately, there's a lot of commonly used building products that contain dozens of harmful chemicals that then get released into the indoor air. So a critical approach for addressing this issue is to make sure that we're selecting products that limit known toxins like formaldehyde or phthalates or isocyanates, and make sure that we're limiting those within the indoor environment. Thankfully, there's some databases and certifications that are out there to allow us to make smarter decisions around this particular topic. So finally, when we're talking about well-being, we're also going to talk about something called biophilia, or our innate connection as human beings to nature. So this goes back a long time to our roots on the African savanna, but humans have developed an innate connection to nature that elicits beneficial physical and psychological responses to the natural world. So for example, taking a 10-minute walk in nature has been shown to lower your heart rate, lower your blood pressure, lower your cortisol levels, and this reduces feelings of stress and anxiety. So there's a variety of ways aside from just walking in nature that we can elicit these same reactions within the indoor environment. And as you'll see here, there's actually something called the 14 patterns of biophilia that allow us to take these lessons from nature and apply it into the indoor environment in different ways. So now I'd like to get some of your feedback here very quickly. So if you go to menti.com, this is a link for this is going to be sent in the chat, and use the code that you see at the top of the screen here and within the chat as well. You can start to participate in this live poll. And I'm going to switch over real fast, but the question here is, from the conversations that we just went through, which of the following do you think should be prioritized as a key design strategy for Revere High School? You can rank these in order of highest priority to lowest priority within this online poll. So I'm going to jump over to that right now. And we can see responses come in. Great, it looks like at least one person has figured this out. I'm going to give us another minute or two to get some feedback, and we'll see what rises to the top. This is great to see. I'm not surprised to see air quality coming to the top of the pack here. Oh, it just got bumped. But thank you all for providing this feedback. I think it'll really help us to kind of zoom into priority strategies at this early design stage. Okay, so that's going to remain open for a second if you guys want to continue to flesh that out. I'm going to hop back to the PowerPoint. We can come back to the results later if we would like. Okay, so now we're going to move on to talk about energy. As mentioned earlier, when we talk about sustainability and energy in particular, it's much more than just solar panels. And we've outlined here a few priority strategies that are worth discussing at this stage. So the first is high performance design. In other words, how can we reduce the amount of energy that we need to begin with for this project, just using smart design strategies? Then after that, we can discuss how to improve how we're operating the building, which might even include conversations around altering how teachers and students behave within that environment to use energy. And then finally, can we look at eliminating our reliance on fossil fuels and integrate renewable energy into the project, potentially even pursuing net zero energy as a goal or target. So quickly going into each one of those, starting with high performance design, what do we mean by that? How a building is designed and constructed can have a big impact on its overall energy consumption. So for example, an all glass building will require significantly more energy to maintain comfort in this environment than one that has more insulated walls as a part of it. So while we've already made smart decisions around building orientation that Dawn was highlighting earlier, the next step would be to carefully tailor the design of the building envelope in particular to make sure that we're addressing energy, reducing the amount of energy that's needed, while also improving something like daylight within that indoor environment. The next category is improving the operations. So as the building becomes more and more efficient around energy, plug loads, as you'll see here, become a bigger chunk of the total amount of energy that's being consumed. And what we found is that there's a lot of equipment that comes into a building and physically plugs in. That's what we call plug loads. And it becomes really important for us to try to reduce the amount of equipment overall that gets plugged in order to reduce our energy consumption. So instead of every teacher having their own coffee maker, printer, refrigerator within each classroom, consolidating these items into shared teacher workrooms becomes critical to reducing energy. Next, in improve the operations, we can't shy away from the contributions that building occupants have on energy consumption. People use energy first and foremost. So the challenge then becomes, how do you create a school culture that prioritizes energy conservation? For example, where classes leave their lights off during sunny days in favor of using natural light, or monitors and screens get turned off at the end of the day. This is an example of a dashboard that we're creating to kind of help give a feedback loop to the building occupants around exactly how much energy and water they're consuming on a daily basis to allow them to then address it and make improvements. And finally, once we do smart things around design and operations to reduce energy, the idea of net zero energy comes within reach. The first step is to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and see if we can take advantage of more free resources on site, such as geothermal heating or cooling instead of utilizing natural gas. And then we can look into on-site solar or wind opportunities and look carefully into the cost balance between first costs and operating costs over time to determine the best path forward on this. So now we're going to jump to Mentimeter again, and I will jump over and flip to the next one. So now I'm asking the same question. Let's prioritize the following design strategies in the energy category in particular. Again, asking you to prioritize from highest to lowest of what we just went through. So I'll give people a minute or two to start this process. Okay. Looks like the high performance design strategies are leading the effort here, which is great. But there's definitely appears to be an interest in pursuing net zero energy. That's kind of rising to the top as a part of this as well. So that's really exciting to hear. Again, I'll leave this open for a minute if you didn't get a chance to answer while I jump back to the PowerPoint. And what I just got a note that I'm talking a little too fast for the translators, so I'm sorry. I'm going to try to speak more slowly for this last section, which is change. So what do we mean by change? Maybe well-being and energy were a little bit more clear, but for change, our world and environment is ever-changing. When we design a school, we have to design for flexibility and adaptability to accommodate changes over time. But in particular today, what I want to zoom into is environmental change and what priorities we should be considering on that front at this early stage. So I'm going to start by introducing a concept called passive survivability, which basically means that if the building loses power, or if the whole city of Revere loses power, can the building remain operational? Can we still use it, at least at a basic level? In order to allow us to continue to use that space, we need to think about how we can get daylight into regularly occupied spaces, how these spaces would be ventilated, heated and cooled in the event of a power outage. So this means designing for daylight autonomy, allowing for operable windows, and making sure that we have a robust building envelope that can help regulate indoor temperatures. The next category we'll talk about is really about backup power. So this has historically been provided by fossil fuel reliant backup generators, but there are other opportunities to consider, especially if we go down the route of putting on-site renewable energies on the building. We can actually pair this with looking into battery backup instead of fossil fuel reliant generators. But the second part of this equation, probably the more important question here, is how much backup power is actually needed? How many days should the building be able to run in the event of an emergency? And what services are critical? So similarly to the conversation around backup energy, we can talk about backup water. In this circumstance, if clean or fresh water become an issue for any reason, is there an opportunity on site for the building to capture and treat water in a way that reduces its reliance on city water? This may mean capturing stormwater for building use, looking into reusing gray water, and it certainly will make sure that we're minimizing the amount of water needed for unnecessary tasks such as landscaping. Next, we'll talk about preparing for the future. So we're already seeing the impacts of climate change in our region, and we have predictions of what future climate conditions will look like for Revere in the year 2050, in 2080, and beyond. Making sure that we're designing our buildings so that it will function not only in current conditions, but in future climate conditions, and that not only will it function, but we'll be able to maintain comfort while achieving the energy efficiency targets that we're setting should and could be a priority when we think about climate change. The final category here is a question. Should the building be seen as a community support facility, and to what extent? So during COVID, we saw a lot of schools being used for things like testing and vaccinations and food distribution. But during natural disasters, such as hurricanes and or flooding events, should they occur, can Revere become a place where the community can come for emergency power and water if needed? What are the ways that this building could serve the community in the event of these natural disasters? And is that something we want to build into the design at this stage? So with that, I'm going to flip over again one last time to the Mentimeter poll. And move on to the next question here, which again, we're asking you to prioritize these different strategies that we talked about within change from highest to lowest. Great. Okay. This is very interesting to see. I'll keep this open. Oh, community support just bumped back up there. I was expecting that to be a priority. So I'm glad to see that kind of rising to the top. And future proofing and designing for those future climate change conditions is certainly a priority here. So thank you all for sharing today and for providing feedback. At this point, I will open it up and pass it over for any questions that may have come in the chat, either for the first section of this presentation or what we just went through today. I'll stop my share.
So there was a question in Zoom that I think harkens back to the first part of the presentation. It asks if Saugus High School is a good example of how a high school can work on a main road. And I don't know if our partners at Perkins Eastman or Left Field know Saugus High School at all, but it's pretty much on Route 1.
It is on Route 1, but I'll add that it's really got one edge that's you know, in a similar condition where it's a major highway. It's fed on the other three sides by effectively residential or, you know, easily travelable streets. So I think what's unique about Wonderland is the train and the highway really cut it off on in a V shape on the majority, and certainly cut it off in the direction of the majority of residential and kind of the center of town. So similar in aspects of probably addressing pollution and sound and the fact that at least one direction is cut off for walkability, but not exactly the same. I hope that answers it.
So we had a comment and a question on YouTube, two different members. The first just stated that they wouldn't want their children attending a high school that is so close to a main highway. So just some input on that. There was a question about where these meetings take place, this actual meeting, so the public can attend. Right now we're in a virtual format. The public is also always welcome to attend and pose questions and vote just as we are tonight and provide input. I think that's kind of where we're at right now in terms of how these meetings are going to be held.
And I'll just add to that, Dr. Gallucci, that the school building committee meetings, which happen every other Thursday, are also on Zoom, and those meetings are posted on the City of Revere website, as all open meetings are. So folks can check there. The next meeting is next Thursday, which that date is the 26th. And then it'll be every other Thursday after that. And the links are on the City of Revere website if anybody wants to join those meetings. So I'm seeing on YouTube a couple more questions. Flood hazard area, which applies to Wonderland, and also Ericola Park has some of that similar risk. And I don't know if Bob, you want to speak to that a little bit.
Sure, I can start. Yes, that's exactly right. The Wonderland site, and I think it's the majority of the high school site, if not all, is in the 100-year floodplain. Heather or Dawn or anybody from the team, if you want to add a little bit more. The Revere Housing Authority site is, yeah. The Revere Housing Authority site is on much higher ground and is seen as maybe more resilient from that specific category.
Yeah, and I would just add that those two sites, they're not only within the 100-year floodplain, but the elevation line for that flood is around 11 to 12 feet on both of those sites. So it's pretty significantly within the flood line and would obviously need to be addressed when we talk about resiliency and designing for change.
We also had a question that asks whether future-proofing, whether or not that takes into consideration the growth of the city.
And so I can try to address that one as well. One of the ways that we are addressing growth in the city was in part of our application process with the MSBA. They did a long-term study of our student enrollment. And although we currently have just over 2,000 students in the current high school, this building is being built for 2,450 students, which is what the MSBA's accountants or actuaries have identified as the right number for us to anticipate to be enrolled in the high school roughly 15 years from now. So the idea is after the school opens and for some number of years after that, if we were to follow the same city growth trajectory that we're on right now, that's how many students we could expect to have at the high school.
Right, and I guess I could tag on to that. We're also designing for flexibility of rooms and for smaller class sizes. So there's really room for growth and for improvements in the learning environment.
And there is a question in the Zoom room asking, could the Sargent Street and Cushman Ave area sustain or accept a third school in that area? And that's a reference to the West Revere complex, which is the Susan B. Anthony and the Wayland School that is just up the street from the area that we're talking about at the Housing Authority. And I'll also mention the Lincoln School on Tuckerman Ave, which is not very far from that area either.
I guess I could take a stab at answering that. We expect that most of the vehicular access would be off of Constitution Ave, where the main entrance is, and off of Cushman might be walkers, bikers, and just bus drop off. So, and that is subject to change as well. But the idea is that most of the access to the building would happen at the lower level at the Constitution Ave, down off of Adams to Constitution, or off of Broadway to Constitution. And Cushman Ave would be sort of a secondary access to it because it is at a higher level and you would access from the second floor, which is not the, that would be for students only because that would not be the main entry, where the secure main entry would be down at Constitution Ave ground plane. And I assume if that were moving forward, and Dan Colley, I'm looking at you, there would be traffic studies and all sorts of other aspects as we would move forward with whichever site is selected. So that's part of the process as a site gets selected, that we would dive deeper into access around that site.
That's correct. We would do the due diligence to make sure that site would work properly.
Also, without knowing, Dr. Kelly, without knowing your school times of all the different schools, I assume they are staggered, as most districts are, as far as start time.
Yeah, our elementary schools start at a different time than the middle and high schools. But the middle and high, so we would be looking at, if we were to keep the same time schedule that we have right now, which is something else that we should interrogate as we go through this process. But if it was to stay as it is, then it would be the Susan B. Anthony Middle School and the high school in proximity to each other that would start at the same time. And with the long-term vision of making the current high school building into a central middle school, that would eliminate that problem. And then the Wayland and the Lincoln, because they're both elementaries, would start at a different time.
Excellent, great.
I think that's all that we have. Richie, anything else on YouTube?
No, that's it. No other questions.
This certainly won't be our last meeting, and I know we've got a series of the building committee meetings, by the way, are every other week, so every 2 weeks.
And folks are welcome to attend those as well. They are open meetings. So I'm going to thank everybody for their participation, and I especially want to thank our team at Perkins Eastman and also our team at Left Field who are here with us tonight for helping us bring this information to the community. And thank you to everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And a special thank you to our translators as well.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Mhm.